F1 returned to Australia and a revitalised Albert Park to race for the first time in 3 years. Qualifying looked ultra competitive, but the race was another story in what turned out to be the most dominant display by Ferrari and Charles Leclerc we've seen so far this year. And the Ferrari driver took his second win of the year ahead of Sergio Perez in the Red Bull and George Russell, who secured his first Mercedes podium. The recording date is Monday, the 11th of April. My name is Harry Benjamin. Alongside me, as ever, is Crash's F1 editor Lewis Larkham and Formula One commentator for the likes of the BBC and Channel 4, Ben Edwards. And Ben, well, we knew Leclerc and Ferrari were fast. Biggest winning margin of the season, though. Over 20 seconds. We didn't expect him to be that fast.
No, that was a remarkable weekend. They got it so right, didn't they, with Charles Leclerc? He was absolutely on top of everything throughout the whole weekend, and they worked it perfectly. And the way they set the car up, what they learnt on the Friday, worked perfectly on the Saturday in qualifying and, more importantly, in the race. That race pace that he had was crucial. And what really struck me, there were a couple of times that really struck me how strong it was. When he made that rather poor restart after a safety car, and Max had a real chance at getting him, he just dealt with it so easily almost, even though he was a bit under threat, and then just pulled away again, no problem at all. They were in a different league, there's no doubt, and we could see that the Red Bull was suffering in comparison. So Ferrari are on top at the moment, and they're flying along.
It certainly was. And Lewis, a lot was made coming into this weekend about, I think he was branded this is a 2.0 version of Charles Leclerc, which he didn't really like too much because he doesn't think he's changed particularly. But 2 wins on the trot. I think before this weekend, in the last 8 Australian Grand Prix, only one has been able to convert the win from pole, and that was Lewis Hamilton. Leclerc's wins have all come from a pole position that he secured into a race win. So he's really going to be mounting a challenge, and he's already well ahead in the points.
Yeah, I think Charles really shown his championship credentials this weekend. He was absolutely flawless throughout the whole weekend. Fastest in qualifying, perfect in the race. The only slight sort of worry for him was, as Ben mentioned, the second safety car restart. But he was able to defend from Max into turn one and then pulled away with ease. It has to be said that even if Max had finished the race, he had Max covered. He had an answer every time and would have probably finished with the same sort of margin that he had over Perez in the end. Absolute domination from Leclerc and Ferrari. I think it just further underlines the strengths of that Ferrari package. We've had 3 different circuits now that it's been competitive at. The performance seems to come with ease. There's still sort of porpoising issues. We're seeing that on the straight still. That doesn't seem to be an issue for them performance-wise as it is for Mercedes. And going through the corners in particular, the Ferrari just looks absolutely planted, and they've found a really nice setup with that car where it just seems to be fast no matter what. So yeah, as I said, I think Leclerc's really sort of demonstrated his caliber for potentially winning this year's world title. And I think him and Ferrari look in full control at the moment.
I'll tell you what, though, you guys asked, you always ask, Harry, what I think about top 3. I got it so wrong this time because I went for Carlos and he had a miserable weekend. I mean, we're saying how strong Ferrari are. He had a terrible time. And actually, I really feel for him, but I think he got overhot. I think everything went against him and he kind of overreacted to it. I get the feeling that it just didn't come together. I think he's got the maturity to go away from Australia, just wipe it off his card, as it were, and think, right, I've got to forget that one. But I do feel he's in he is in that position now. Really, he has no choice. He's going to have to back up Charles Leclerc because he's not close enough at this stage in a way. So he's going to be in that role of supporting him rather than battling for a championship.
Yeah, we said last time how important it was that he had a good, strong result this weekend to sort of stay in the hunt. And obviously the way it panned out for him, it was just a disastrous weekend. Not all of his own doing. He was really unfortunate in qualifying. He looked like he had the pace to potentially challenge for that maiden pole position. And then he lost his best lap in Q3 to the unfortunate timing of the red flag with Fernando crashing. And then on the second lap, he just Ferrari had issues starting up his car, and then that led to him not being able to warm up his tyres properly and not improving on his lap time. So that really set up what was ultimately the bad weekend for him. And then the car went into anti-stall on the grids, more issues where I think Ferrari had to change the steering wheel on his car before the race as well. It was just one thing after another for Carlos. And then ultimately in his sort of desperate bid to get back up the order, he's obviously made the mistake and ended up in the gravel trap. But as Ben says, this really sort of confirms now that he's going to have to be playing this supporting role for Leclerc's title bid, given the points difference between them now.
Well, it certainly does, doesn't it? And if we then flip that same kind of conundrum onto Red Bull, reliability, Ben, now going to be a huge worry for them. Verstappen we're still waiting to hear the exact full details of it, but we think he was forced out of that race due to a fuel issue or something to do with the fuel system. That saw him out of the race, but he wasn't really challenging for the lead, but he pretty much had second place, sort of confined to him. Sergio Perez, meanwhile, the de facto number 2, as he was brought in for, managed to save the day a little bit and get a podium. But can you imagine a situation where now that's 2-0 points for Max Verstappen? If that carries on, they're going to have to shift their focus and back Perez, right?
Well, that's an interesting idea. Yeah. Actually, what really strikes me is I was surprised last year that there weren't more mechanical issues for Red Bull when it was run as the Honda power plant. And up to last year, we had seen quite a lot of technical reliability issues with Honda. And then we went through last year and we got into the latter part, and I thought surely Honda might have some problems. They really didn't. I was pretty impressed, I have to say, by their reliability. And now under the Red Bull power plant name, and it's not just that. I mean, there's obviously a combination of different things that have gone wrong in these 2 non-finishes he's had. And yet he's had 2 very early zeros, which is a tough one for the team. That's really painful. They've put so much work in, and to lose that reliability. I do wonder, though. I think we have this long season. I think it could be one of those luck situations to a certain extent. And teams go through this at some point during a year. And maybe that's just they're going through it now. They are such a strong team. They're so focused as a team. They will get on top of this reliability issue. I know they will. But having lost 2 opportunities to score decent podium points, it is painful. And they're going to have to dig really deep. You could see it in the sort of characterization from Christian, from the rest of the team. They know they've really got to dig deep now.
They certainly have, and Charles Leclerc leads the championship as a consequence by a larger margin than anyone did in the whole of 2021. Now, it is early days. I've got that one out of the way. I've hit the bingo chart on that one. But looking then, it was an up and down one for Red Bull, Lewis. But Mercedes, we've spoken so much about how this has been, a terrible start, really, when you put it into context. Their worst start to a season since 2013. But Russell, second in the driver standings, the team second in the driver standings, and George Russell, I think, saying crucially after the race that it's all well and good having a fast car, but if you can't make it to the end of the races, then you're not picking up those points, are you?
Yeah, exactly. I think it was a great result for Mercedes. They'll reflect on the weekend and be very happy. They would have sort of bitten your hand off if you'd offered that to them at the start of the weekend. They were over a second off the pace on Friday, second off the pace in qualifying, but obviously locked out that 3rd row. And really, it looked like 5th and 6th might be the best they could achieve on merit. They got a bit fortunate again, particularly with George, obviously with the safety car timing. But the encouraging thing was that the car actually had pretty good pace in the race. For the first time this season, it actually looked fairly competitive. At times, I think particularly on Lewis's medium stint, he was matching what the Red Bulls were able to do. So the team still don't think they've not solved anything, but clearly that just shows that there is some inherent pace in the car, and makes you think what could be achieved if they can get on top of those problems that they've had. But a really great result in terms of the damage limitation that Mercedes currently find themselves in. Obviously not where they want to be finishing. But yeah, it was probably the best result they could have hoped for. We saw as well Lewis was running extra sensors on his car, that apparently added up to an extra 1.5 kilograms of weight, and the Mercedes is already one of the most overweight cars on the grid. So Lewis had an extra 1.5 kilos compared to George throughout the weekend. So that again shows sort of how good his performance was. And I think obviously with he got particularly unlucky with the safety car. I think without that, he probably would have been the driver finishing third ahead of George. But a good performance from both drivers. Realistically, there's obviously they're a long way back in both world championships, and the title chances still look a long shot. But obviously, it is a long season. There's still 20 races to go. And I think it's just a case of how quickly they can get on top of those issues. If they can find something that addresses the porpoising problems in the next couple of races, we could see them sort of emerge as championship contenders. But right now, it still feels like a bit of a long shot. Lewis has said that he's planning lots of Zoom calls with the team this week in his sort of bid to push through these upgrades that he's saying are really needed now, because you can see the gap he's got to Charlotte at the top of the championship, and he's remaining optimistic, but realistically it does seem like a long shot at this stage. But it just depends on how quickly they can get on top of those issues. And as Ben said, this season is luck will come into it as well. Only takes something to go wrong for Leclerc one race, or Leclerc and Max to start potentially running, tripping over each other, and suddenly things could open up. But yeah, I think Mercedes will be very happy on reflection with how the weekend went, but there's still obviously a lot of work they need to do to improve.
I think also from the Mercedes power plant point of view, it was good too, wasn't it? I mean, McLaren had that stronger weekend. We can talk about them a little bit more, but Mercedes engined cars. You had the Williams actually getting a point at the end as well, which was, we'll talk about that because that was quite interesting later on. Wasn't so good for Aston Martin, but generally you sort of do wonder, did Mercedes, were they able to, did the circuit suit their power unit, or were they able to up it a little bit? I don't know, I have no idea, but it was just interesting to see that.
It does seem like there might have been a lot of track specific results. I think Lando Norris saying in the McLaren, look, it just kind of suits our car here. But let's go on to McLaren actually, because even if it was track specific, Ben, regardless, look at where they were in Bahrain, practically plumb last. It's a hell of a turnaround in a short space of time. And Ricciardo finishing just behind Norris, so they were in 5th and 6th. First points of 2022 for Ricciardo. I think it was the first time both McLarens were in Q3. That's really good progress from them. They surely think, okay, now we're in the fight here.
Yeah, but I think it was quite clear listening to what Lando was saying about it. The tarmac surface at that track was really suiting them, and they were getting good performance out of the tyres. Interestingly, Red Bull were not. Clearly, they were really suffering, particularly that left front tyre on both Perez and Verstappen's car, and it seemed to work for McLaren in qualifying and in the race for some reason. So and clearly they've got to learn from that a little bit. The tyres this year do seem a bit different for all of the teams, and they're trying to readjust themselves to it. It worked around that surface, but we do know that surface there is slightly different to most of the other tracks that the teams go to. So, yeah, I'm not sure McLaren have quite got the confidence yet to say, yeah, we've made that step up. And you look at Alpine as well, they missed out, didn't they? So we could have seen a much better performance or better result from Fernando Alonso. We saw some very rapid laps from him on sectors, but it didn't always work out as a complete lap. But so, yeah, I think it was certainly a positive, and definitely for Daniel. I'm so happy for Ricciardo that he scored some points, particularly on his home circuit, and that's got to give them all a boost. But I think they've still got plenty to settle down to and work at.
Ben Edwards dulling the McLaren hopes for the time being. But actually, you bring up the new surface, actually, and conversely, I think that had an opposite effect, particularly on teams like Haas, who, after the first 2 rounds, we expected them to be right up there. But they were saying, actually, we just really struggling to get to grips with our setup here. And that brings me on, Ben, to the track changes that were made. A lot of talk coming into this weekend about them. Simple question. Did they work?
It's a good question. I mean, it is a street track at the end of the day, and you're not going to get massive amounts of overtaking, I don't think, on a track like that. I think it was interesting. I think that I think it was a blend, though, of this new design of cars as much as the track change. That the loss of that chicane at the back section where they now just go flat out, I sort of missed it a bit, actually. I rather missed seeing the cars working a bit harder through that section. But I think it probably did help. What they were looking for is to get the cars close into turn 11. And we did see one or two little movers. I was hoping to see more there at turn 11. There wasn't as much there as I sort of expected. That's one of the last corners. It's as you go into that last little sequence of twisty bits coming around onto the start-finish straight, but it's a few corners back. And it's after that very fast chicane. We did see Perez make a good move down the outside there. Not as many moves as I would have liked, but overall, I think it kind of worked with these modern cars, because I've commentated on plenty of races in Melbourne where there were basically no overtakes, and we did at least see some.
Yeah, that is true.
I think they probably did work. I mean, granted we haven't had a race in Melbourne for a few years, so memory's probably a bit fuzzy. But I can't really remember a time that in recent times anyway that there's been a race in Australia that's been so sort of action packed. It felt to me like there was a lot going on, and in the drivers were always sort of close to each other, and that is, as Ben said, partly down to the cars themselves. But I think that the changes did work. I think it added a extra challenge for the drivers as well. Okay, we didn't get lots of overtaking, but we never really do in Australia, and it is part and parcel of it being a street circuit. And also, I think looking back, if you step back from it, the first two races of the season, we've been treated to absolutely epic fights for the lead, great racing, and on reflection, I think it was still a good race. Ultimately, you still had plenty going on. It just wasn't quite that battle for the lead that we would have hoped for. But I think the changes probably were positive. I think the drivers said had they kept the fourth DRS zone, they think they would have been more passes possible, but obviously that was removed on safety grounds. Potentially could have been better action, but I thought on the whole it was pretty good for an Australian Grand Prix.
We had that big train in the midfield for so long, didn't we? That was sort of being spearheaded, I think, a bit by Lance Stroll, who was out of position. And what I thought we actually got, a lot of the action was sort of spurred on by a bit of the pit stop and tyre strategy. Actually, we haven't seen too much of that, and you thought coming into it, Ben, Australia, typical one-stop race, but we saw a couple of teams who had nothing to lose really trying something different. Aston Martin being one of them, didn't quite work out for them, but it did work out for the Williams, out of Alexander Albon stealing a point. At one point we didn't think he would pit, which of course is a mandatory requirement as part of the regulations. But what a fantastic result for Williams, and nothing to lose. He started plumb last.
It was amazing, and I had to look back again at some of it actually, and just look at the distance that he had, and was looking at because at one point I thought, how did he make this work? Because there wasn't the 19-second gap; it was about a 19-second loss doing a pit stop there, and there was no way that 19 seconds that he was going to end up in the points. But I had to look back at it and just think, yeah, right, I see. Just before that last part, it was helped a little bit, ironically, by Stroll holding up that midfield. That helped him a lot, because it dropped that group back a bit further than I think it would have been. If Gasly had got past and the others had got past Stroll earlier, it would have changed things. But the other thing I'd also noticed, because it all happened on the last lap, and of course we were celebrating Leclerc's win, what we didn't actually see, as he came out of the pits, he was right with Zhou Guanyu, and he was just a couple of tenths in front of him on a set of soft tyres. And if Joe had just been a tiny bit more rapid, he must be feeling so frustrated, because if he'd just been a fraction more, it's like 0.3 was what he missed out on being in front of Albon. But fair play to Albon. He did a great job on those hard tyres for so long, and he thoroughly deserved that point. And well done to Williams for playing again.
Absolutely, and keeping up that pace. I've actually seen the onboard footage from Zhou Guanyu in that final lap, and he's just a little bit throttle happy going into turn one, and that just puts him off kilter. And so he that's when he loses out, I think. And then after that, he just can't get close enough. But it absolutely, as you say, Ben, it was so tight, and a brilliant strategy call in the end from Williams. But Zhou Guanyu just missing out on the points again, Lewis, in 11th. But conversely, I suppose, who was trying trying the long game, I suppose, was Aston Martin with Lance Stroll. I think they came in early under the first safety car, didn't they, for a cheeky pit stop to get rid of the